In a
You think you're
forgotten
tough?
roadside diner,
You're nothing but a
three
cheap
gangsters
waitress in
believed
a
fear
dump.
would keep everyone silent. They harassed a waitress,
Get your hands
mocked her
off me!
silence, and crossed a line they could never undo. What they didn't see was the man in the back booth, a Navy SEAL on forced leave, trained for war,
Stay
forged
down.
by loss. And they never noticed the German Shepherd beneath the table,
Kill him
a
now.
combat-trained K9, watching, waiting, calculating. One touch, one mistake. What should have been a small act of cruelty ignited a chain reaction. Ambushes, mercenaries, corruption exposed, and a criminal empire burning from the inside out. This isn't just a story about violence. It's about what happens when predators choose the wrong prey. Subscribe now and stay until the end. Cold Atlantic wind rolled in from the sea, carrying salt, fog, and an unease that clung to Greyport like a second skin, wrapping the coastal town in a silence that felt deliberate rather than peaceful. Ethan Walker drove slowly along the cracked shoreline road, his old navy green pickup humming steadily beneath him. He was 33 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and built like a man shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His dark brown hair was cut short in the regulation military style, faded at the sides, practical and unremarkable, while a rough stubble shadowed a jawline carved sharp by stress and age beyond his years. His skin was weathered, tanned unevenly by sun and salt, marked with faint scars that told quiet stories of places no tourist brochure would ever show. Ethan's eyes, steel gray, calm, observant, missed very little. They were the eyes of a man who had learned through blood and consequence. That awareness was often the difference between breathing and becoming a name etched into stone. Beside him sat Rex. The Belgian Malinois was nearly 4 years old, lean and muscular, his tan coat streaked with black along the muzzle and spine, like war paint painted by nature itself. Rex's ears stood alert, sharp triangles constantly swiveling, his amber eyes scanning reflections in windows, alleys, and passing vehicles. He was not large for intimidation alone. He was built for speed, endurance, and precision. Every movement was controlled, silent, purposeful. Rex was not a pet. He was a trained military working dog, conditioned through hundreds of hours of drills, live fire exercises, scent tracking, and urban combat simulations. He had jumped from helicopters, crawled through smoke-filled corridors, and held suspects at bay while bullets cracked through the air. Rex trusted Ethan with the absolute certainty of a soldier who had survived because of the man beside him. Ethan was officially on mandatory administrative leave, a phrase that sounded far kinder than it felt. 3 months earlier, a classified operation in the eastern Mediterranean had gone sideways due to bad intelligence and political pressure. Ethan had disobeyed a delayed extraction order to pull 2 wounded teammates from a collapsing structure. They lived. The mission objective did not. The investigation was ongoing. So, was the silence from command. Ethan had been told to stand down, to disappear quietly, to stay away from anything resembling trouble. That was how he had ended up driving aimlessly along the coast, Rex as his only constant, trying to convince himself that rest was not the same thing as running. Greyport was not a town that welcomed strangers. The buildings were squat and tired, their paint bleached by years of harsh weather, fishing nets hanging like abandoned thoughts along rusted fences. The harbor cranes stood motionless, skeletal silhouettes against the gray sky. People moved quickly here, heads down, conversations muted. No laughter drifted from open doors. No children played in the streets. Ethan noticed the absence immediately. Towns, like people, had rhythms. Greyport's was offbeat, like a heart skipping too many pulses. He parked near a late-night diner called Harbor Light, its neon sign flickering weakly, one letter perpetually threatening to go dark. Ethan scanned the surroundings before stepping out, habit ingrained too deeply to unlearn. Rex exited smoothly, staying close to Ethan's left leg, matching his pace. Inside, the diner smelled of grease, burnt coffee, and damp wool. A handful of locals sat scattered across booths, their eyes briefly lifting before returning to their meals with practiced indifference. Ethan chose a booth near the back wall, where he could see both entrances. He removed his jacket, revealing a plain dark shirt stretched across a chest hardened by years of training. His posture remained straight, even as he sat, shoulders squared, movements economical. Rex slid under the table, positioning himself with his head resting lightly against Ethan's boot, eyes still active. A waitress approached. Her name, according to the stitched tag on her apron, was Mara Collins, She appeared to be in her late 20s, slim but worn down by exhaustion, her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail with strands escaping to frame a pale, freckled face. Her eyes were a tired blue, sharp with caution, the kind that belonged to someone who had learned when to speak and when silence was safer. "Coffee?" she asked, voice neutral. "Black," Ethan replied. "And whatever's hot." Mara nodded, her gaze briefly flicking to Rex. Dog's well behaved. "He had good teachers," Ethan said, not smiling. Minutes passed in relative quiet. Ethan drank his coffee slowly, letting the bitterness ground him. He told himself this was just another stop, another place he'd pass through without leaving a mark. Then the door opened. 3 men entered, bringing with them a shift in pressure that Ethan felt before he consciously processed it. The first was tall and narrow, his movements loose but aggressive. Blonde hair slicked back, a leather jacket hanging open over a graphic shirt. His face was angular, sharp-cheeked, with a grin that suggested cruelty came easily to him. The second was broader, a shaved head, thick neck, forearms corded with muscle, a spiderweb tattoo crawling up from his collar. The third man lingered slightly behind, eyes darting, nervous energy poorly concealed. The leader's name, Ethan would soon learn, was Caleb Moore. They laughed loudly, the sound hollow, performative. Conversations in the diner died instantly. Mara stiffened near the counter, fingers tightening around a coffee pot. "Well, look at this," Caleb said, voice oily, stepping closer to her, still pretending this place is respectable. "I'm working," Mara replied evenly. Not meeting his eyes, Caleb leaned over the counter, invading her space. "That's funny, 'cause my boss says you owe, and when people owe, they don't get to pretend." Ethan felt Rex tense under the table, not growling, not moving, just ready. "Take it up with the owner," Mara said. "I don't handle money." Caleb laughed and reached out, fingers brushing her wrist. "You handle plenty." That was when Rex's head lifted, eyes locked on Caleb's hand, a low, nearly inaudible rumble vibrating through his chest. Ethan set his cup down carefully. He stood. Ethan did not move quickly. He did not raise his voice. He simply unfolded himself from the booth and stepped forward, placing his body between Caleb and the waitress. Up close, Ethan was imposing in a quiet way, his height and width undeniable, his expression unreadable. "Step back," he said calmly. Caleb blinked, surprised, then sneered. "You lost, tourist." "No," Ethan replied, "but you are." The bald man cracked his knuckles. The nervous one glanced toward the door. Caleb's smile faltered just enough to register. "This ain't your business." "It became my business when you touched her." For a moment, no one moved. Then Caleb shoved Ethan's chest. It was a mistake. Ethan caught the man's wrist, twisted, and applied pressure with surgical precision. Caleb screamed as he dropped to one knee. The bald man lunged. But Rex exploded from under the table, teeth snapping inches from the man's forearm, stopping him cold. Chaos erupted, chairs scraped, people shouted, but it was over in seconds. Ethan released Caleb, who scrambled backward, clutching his arm, terror replacing arrogance. "Leave," Ethan said. "Now." They did. Silence fell heavy. Mara stared at Ethan, shock and something like gratitude flickering across her face. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "I know." As he paid and turned to leave, Rex suddenly froze near the window, nose pressed low. He let out a soft, alert whine. Ethan followed his gaze to a truck parked across the street, engine idling. Something metallic glinted beneath a tarp in the bed. Rex's body language changed, focused, intent. Ethan recognized it instantly. Weapons. This wasn't just harassment. This was infrastructure, organization, control. Ethan stepped outside, the wind biting harder now. Grayport hadn't wanted to be saved, but it might not get a choice. And somewhere in the dark, something had noticed him, noticing back. By dawn, Grayport felt different, not quieter but sharper, as if the town itself had drawn a breath and was waiting to see who would exhale first. Ethan Walker discovered the sabotage just after sunrise. The pickup truck that had carried him and Rex through a dozen forgotten towns sat crippled behind the Harbor Light diner, its front tire sliced clean to the rim. The hood slightly ajar, he crouched beside it, running a thick finger along the rubber, his jaw tightening. The cut was deliberate, professional, under the hood. The battery cables had been pulled loose and the ignition line severed with a tool, not a knife. This wasn't the work of drunk locals or angry hotheads nursing bruised egos from the night before. This was isolation. Someone wanted him stuck in Grayport. Rex circled the vehicle slowly, nose low, tail stiff, breathing changing as he picked up overlapping scents. His ears flattened for a moment, then snapped upright. Ethan watched him carefully. In combat zones, Rex's reactions had saved lives more times than Ethan could count. The dog paused near the rear bumper and released a short, sharp huff, alert. Not alarm, someone had been there recently. More than one someone. Ethan straightened, scanning the street. The harbor road was nearly empty. Fishing boats rocking gently in the mist. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. Eyes withdrew. Grayport was watching him now. Not with curiosity, but calculation. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The quiet mental shift that came when uncertainty hardened into threat. He had hoped to pass through unnoticed. That hope was gone. He checked his phone. No signal. Grayport sat in a dead pocket between coastal ridges. A convenient blind spot. Ethan clipped the phone back onto his belt and rested a hand briefly on Rex's neck, feeling the warmth and strength there. "We're on foot," he murmured. Rex didn't look disappointed. If anything, he seemed sharper, more alive. Ethan spent the morning moving through town with deliberate casualness, observing rather than interrogating. Years in intelligence work had taught him that people lied with their mouths, but told the truth with their habits. He noted the way a police cruiser idled too long at certain corners, how officers leaned against their doors with relaxed arrogance rather than bored professionalism. One of them, a tall man with a thick brown mustache and tired eyes, glanced at Ethan and then looked away too quickly. That man's name, Ethan would learn later, was Deputy Alan Price, a career officer whose conscience had been eroded by years of choosing the safer silence over the harder truth. By midday, Ethan reached the edge of the industrial port. Massive shipping containers loomed like rusted monuments, and many bearing the faded black and blue emblem of Black Tide Shipping. The company logo was stylized waves wrapped around a compass rose, clever branding for a firm that claimed to specialize in international freight logistics. The yard was active but controlled, guarded by men who wore no uniforms but carried themselves with military discipline. They were not dock workers. They were security, and they were armed. Ethan found a vantage point on a low ridge overlooking the container stacks and lifted a compact monocular. Rex lay beside him, still as stone. Through the lens, Ethan watched a forklift maneuver a sealed container into position. The manifest pasted on its side read, "Marine Equipment, Industrial Use." The wording was vague enough to mean anything. A moment later, a truck backed up. Its rear doors opened briefly, and Ethan caught a glimpse of dark metal cases inside. Long, narrow, unmistakable. Weapons. Too many for personal use. Too organized for coincidence. Black Tide Shipping wasn't just moving illegal goods. It was operating openly, under protection. As Ethan withdrew, a presence prickled at the back of his neck. He shifted direction without breaking stride, ducking into a narrow alley between warehouses. Rex matched him, silent. The sound of footsteps followed, careful but unskilled. Ethan waited until the shadow rounded the corner, then stepped out and pinned the man against the wall in one smooth motion. The man was young, early 20s, slim build, wearing a hooded jacket 2 sizes too big. His skin was pale, his face narrow, acne-scarred, eyes wide with panic. He smelled of fear and cheap cigarettes. "I'm not armed," he stammered. Ethan released him slightly but didn't step back. "Who sent you?" "No one." The kid lied instantly. "Badly. People said you were asking questions." Ethan studied him. This wasn't muscle. This was a runner, a watcher. "Listen carefully," Ethan said, voice low and controlled. "If you follow me again, you'll regret it. If you tell whoever you work for that I hurt you, you'll regret it. Walk away. Forget my face." The kid nodded frantically and fled. Rex watched him go, then looked up at Ethan. The dog's body language was tense now, alert to something more than human fear. Ethan trusted that instinct more than any hunch. "We're being sized up," he said quietly, "and they're not amateurs." By late afternoon, Ethan returned toward the wooded outskirts of Grayport, planning to find elevation and reassess. The coastal forest here was dense, thick with cedar and pine. The ground soft with decades of needles and rain. Visibility dropped quickly. Rex moved ahead, weaving between trunks, stopping now and then to sniff the air. The first shot cracked through the trees without warning. The round struck bark inches from Ethan's head, splintering wood. He dove forward, rolling behind a fallen log as Rex snapped into motion, disappearing into cover. More shots followed, controlled, spaced, not wild, suppressive fire. Ethan's heart rate steadied, his mind narrowing into cold focus. This was a textbook ambush. He drew his sidearm and returned fire in measured bursts, not to kill but to force movement. Shadows shifted. He caught glimpses of 3 attackers, all male, wearing dark outdoor gear, faces obscured. One was tall and broad-shouldered, beard trimmed close, movements confident. Another moved low and fast, almost feline. The third hung back, coordinating. These weren't street thugs. They were contractors. Rex reappeared suddenly to Ethan's right, teeth bared, a warning growl rumbling deep. A man lunged from cover, raising a rifle, but Rex closed the distance in a blur, slamming into him and tearing the weapon free. The man screamed as Rex released on command and vanished again. Ethan used the opening, advancing through the trees, breaking contact rather than pressing the kill. He circled wide, drawing the attackers into uneven ground, then slipped past them entirely, using the forest the way he'd been trained, never where they expected, never where the noise suggested. The ambush dissolved into confusion. Shouted orders echoed uselessly as Ethan and Rex disappeared toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. They didn't stop running until the forest thinned and the wind returned, cold and clean. Ethan leaned against a rock outcrop, breathing steadily, checking Rex for injuries. The dog had a shallow cut on his flank. Nothing serious. Ethan pressed his forehead briefly to Rex's, gratitude and fury tangling in his chest. Someone had authorized that hit. Someone with money and reach. As the sun dipped low, casting the ocean in bruised purple light, Ethan made a decision. Grayport wasn't just a stop anymore. It was a battlefield. Black tide shipping had exposed itself, and so had the local police who looked the other way. If Ethan tried to leave now, they'd hunt him. If he stayed, people would get hurt. He looked back toward the town, smoke rising from chimneys. Unaware or pretending to be, Ethan felt the weight of the past press in, the mission that had cost him his quiet obedience. The moment he'd learned that, sometimes orders and morality diverged. He exhaled slowly. They picked the wrong prey, he murmured to Rex. The dog's tail wagged once, sharp and ready. The hunt had begun. Night fell over Grayport like a lid being slowly pressed shut, the fog thickening until the harbor lights became dull halos floating in the dark. Ethan Walker watched the town from the wooded bluff above the docks, his silhouette broken by branches and shadow. Pain throbbed faintly along his ribs, where he had taken a glancing hit during the ambush earlier that day. A dull reminder that his body was human, no matter how disciplined his mind remained. He welcomed the pain. It kept him sharp. Rex lay beside him, chest rising and falling steadily. The Belgian Malinois perfectly still, except for the subtle twitch of his ears. Under the moonlight, the dog looked carved from muscle and intent, his black and tan coat blending seamlessly with the forest floor. At 4 years old, Rex was in his prime, lean, powerful, with scarred pads and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. Ethan trusted him more than most men he had served with. Rex did not hesitate, did not second-guess, and did not lie. Grayport was rotting from the inside out. Ethan could feel it now, the way you felt a building settling before it collapsed. After the ambush, there was no more pretending this was about intimidation. Black tide shipping had shifted from warning to eradication. That meant time was short, not just for Ethan, but for the people who lived here, people who had learned to survive by staying quiet. He moved as darkness deepened, slipping downhill toward the residential quarter closest to the docks. The houses here were small, weather-beaten, many raised on stilts against storm surge. Light leaked from a few windows, warm and fragile. Ethan knocked on one door softly. 3 times. The woman who answered was Elena Morales, early 40s, average height, but thin to the point of sharpness. Her dark hair streaked with premature gray and tied back tightly. Her skin was olive-toned, worn by years of sea wind and worry. She held the door chain taut, eyes wary but not hostile. "We're closed," she said automatically. "I'm not here to sell anything." Ethan replied quietly, "You have kids." Elena stiffened, her jaw tightened. "Everyone here has kids." Ethan met her gaze, letting her see the honesty there. "There's going to be trouble near the docks tonight. Real trouble. If you can leave, you should go inland, stay with family. If you can't, stay away from the port." She studied him, eyes flicking briefly to Rex behind him. Something in her expression shifted. Recognition. Perhaps of danger when it stood calmly at your door instead of shouting in the street. "You're the man from the diner," she said. "Yes, they'll kill you," she whispered. "Maybe," Ethan answered, "but they won't kill your kids if they're not here." Elena hesitated only a second longer before nodding. "I'll tell the others." That was how it began. Quiet knocks, short conversations, no speeches, no promises. Ethan did not tell them he would save the town. He only told them when to leave and where not to be. People listened because fear had already taught them the cost of ignoring warnings. Near midnight, Rex stiffened suddenly, nose lifting to the wind. Ethan followed his gaze toward the docks. A new scent carried through the air. Oil. Metal. Men who did not belong to the sea. Rex let out a low huff, then moved forward with purpose. They approached the harbor from below, using drainage channels and abandoned service paths. The port was busier than it had any right to be at that hour. Floodlights illuminated sections of the pier, and men moved between containers with practiced efficiency. Ethan counted at least 8 armed guards. More than before, Black Tide was accelerating operations, probably trying to move inventory before federal eyes turned their way. Rex paused near a concrete embankment and sniffed along the waterline, then stopped abruptly, staring at a rusted maintenance hatch half hidden beneath algae and rope. He pawed at it once, then looked back at Ethan. Ethan crouched beside him. The hatch was padlocked, but the metal around it was scuffed, recently disturbed. He pressed his ear to it and listened. Faint echoes drifted up, voices. Machinery, the hollow resonance of a larger space below. An underground storage facility. Rex's tail flicked once. At confirmation, Ethan photographed the hatch, the markings on nearby containers, the guards' rotations, evidence. He needed enough to force intervention, enough to justify what would come next. That was when the first bullet shattered concrete inches from his head. Ethan rolled instinctively, dragging Rex with him as gunfire erupted from the far end of the pier. Muzzle flashes flared like camera strobes. The mercenaries moved differently than the ambushers from the forest, more disciplined, more confident. These men wore tactical gear stripped of insignia, faces obscured by balaclavas. They advanced in pairs, covering angles, cutting off retreat. Black Tide had escalated again. Ethan returned fire, precise and economical, buying seconds rather than ground. Rex sprinted low across the dock, disappearing behind stacked crates, reappearing where no one expected him. A mercenary shouted as Rex slammed into his legs, sending him sprawling. Another man tried to bring his rifle around, but Ethan put a round through the weapon, the metal screaming as it tore apart. They fell back toward the edge of the pier, but more mercenaries emerged from behind the warehouse. A trap closing. A woman screamed nearby. Ethan pivoted, heart spiking, and saw a figure crouch behind a fishing boat, hands over her head. She was young, maybe early 30s, tall and slender, with long auburn hair plastered to her face by mist and fear. Her skin was pale, freckles standing out starkly. She wore a dock worker's jacket far too large for her frame. That was Naomi Reed. Naomi had grown up in Grayport, daughter of a fisherman who had disappeared 2 years earlier after refusing to sell his boat to Black Tide. She had learned to keep her head down, to work late, to avoid trouble. Tonight, trouble had found her anyway. Ethan moved without thinking. He sprinted toward her through gunfire, Rex at his side. A bullet caught Ethan high in the shoulder, tearing through muscle. Pain flared, nearly dropping him, but he kept moving, forcing his body forward through sheer will. He reached to Naomi, hauled her behind cover, and pressed his back to the hull. "Run when I tell you," he said. She nodded, sobbing silently. Rex launched again, breaking the mercenaries' momentum long enough for Ethan to fire 2 more controlled shots. Now, Naomi ran. Ethan and Rex withdrew along the seawall, disappearing into the maze of alleys as sirens wailed in the distance. Too late, and pointedly slow. Ethan collapsed briefly behind a dumpster, breathing hard, blood soaking his sleeve. Rex nudged him insistently, whining once. "I'm good," Ethan muttered, though his vision swam. He tore a strip from his shirt and bound the wound tightly. He couldn't afford to stop. By dawn, the docks were eerily quiet. Black Tide had pulled back, but not before Ethan had transmitted the images and coordinates he'd gathered through an encrypted channel. The response was brief, cautious. Received, reviewing. Bureaucracy moved slower than blood. Ethan sat on the bluff again, watching smoke drift from a distant chimney. His shoulder burned. His body was failing him inch by inch. But he thought of Elena's children, of Naomi running through fog toward a chance to live. He thought of the moment years ago when he had disobeyed orders to save his team, and how that decision had carved him into the man he was now. If he left, Grayport would die quietly. Rex lay beside him, loyal, unbroken. Ethan exhaled, slow and steady. He wasn't done yet. The storm arrived just after nightfall. Not gradually, but with the sudden violence of something long restrained, finally being unleashed. Rain slammed against the roofs of Grayport. Wind howled through the narrow streets, and the sea beyond the harbor rose into dark, heaving shapes that crashed against the breakwater with the sound of artillery. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the town in stark white, revealing a place on the edge of collapse. Ethan Walker sat in the shadows of an abandoned net shed near the cliffs, his injured shoulder wrapped tightly beneath a rain-soaked jacket. His breathing was steady, measured, the way it had been trained to be when pain threatened to cloud judgment. He had already sent the data, high-resolution images of the underground dock hatch, shipping manifests, guard rotations, radio intercepts through an encrypted satellite uplink he had carried since his last deployment. It had taken him nearly an hour to get a clean transmission through the storm interference, but the confirmation ping had come through at last. Data received. Stand by, that was all. No reassurance. No promises, just a signal that the machine had begun to turn. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his forepaws, amber eyes tracking the sheets of rain, as if he could calculate their trajectory. The Malinois' flank was still stained from the earlier fight, the shallow wound already scabbed, but his posture remained alert and ready. At 4 years old, Rex had already seen more combat than most men ever would. His ears twitched at every distant sound, filtering threat from chaos with instinct sharpened by training. Ethan exhaled slowly, resting his forehead against the cool wood of the shed. For the first time since arriving in Grayport, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that help was coming. Not hope, hope was dangerous, but structure, authority, consequences. He had operated too long in environments where the law was a suggestion and morality was enforced at the barrel of a gun. If the Navy and federal agencies were moving, Black Tide's days were numbered. But before that happened, there was one more thing he had to do. Black Tide Shipping's operational nerve center wasn't the docks or the container yard. It was the exchange. A reinforced office complex disguised as a coastal insurance firm on the eastern edge of town. Ethan had confirmed it through intercepted radio traffic and quiet conversations with people who had learned to speak without being heard. Money moved through that building. Orders flowed from it. And tonight, with the storm grounding civilian movement and masking sound, it would be vulnerable. Ethan rose, testing his shoulder. Pain flared but remained manageable. He looked down at Rex. "One more run," he murmured. "Then we're done." Rex stood instantly, tail low, muscles bunching beneath his coat. They approached the exchange from the rear, moving through service alleys flooded ankle-deep with rainwater. The building was squat and ugly, concrete reinforced with steel shutters, its windows dark except for a single floor where light glowed faintly behind storm curtains. 2 guards stood beneath an awning, rifles slung, heads bowed against the rain. They wore civilian clothes but moved with the alert tension of men paid to expect violence. Ethan waited. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled. In that instant of white noise and blinding light, Rex moved. The dog crossed the distance in a heartbeat, silent despite the water, slamming into the first guard's legs and taking him down hard. Ethan surged forward, disabling the second guard with a precise strike to the throat and a knee to the ribs. Both men were unconscious before the thunder faded. Inside, the exchange smelled of ozone and wet concrete. Emergency generators hummed somewhere below. Ethan moved through corridors with practiced ease, Rex scouting ahead, signaling with subtle shifts of posture and ear position. They reached the main operations room on the second floor, where rows of monitors displayed shipping routes, financial ledgers, encrypted communications. And there he was. Marcus Hale, the man who ran Black Tide's inland operations, stood at the central console, barking orders into a headset. Hale was in his late 40s, tall and thin, with sharply cut features and silver hair combed back with obsessive neatness. His face was narrow, nose hawk-like, eyes pale and cold. The eyes of a man who viewed people as assets or obstacles. He wore a tailored waterproof coat over a suit, immaculate even in chaos. Hale had never served in the military, but he had learned to mimic its efficiency. His cruelty was calculated, not impulsive. When Ethan stepped into the light, Hale froze. "You're persistent," Hale said slowly, eyes flicking to Rex. "I told them you weren't normal." Ethan didn't answer. He raised his weapon, firing controlled bursts into the server racks. Sparks flew, screens shattered, alarms wailed. Hale shouted, reaching for a pistol, but a mercenary burst through the side door at that moment. Rifle already firing. Rex leapt between them. The shot cracked through the room, and Rex yelped as the round tore into his shoulder. The dog hit the floor hard, but scrambled up instantly, teeth bared, launching himself into the shooter and dragging him down in a violent tangle of limbs. Ethan felt something inside him tear open at the sound of Rex's pain, a raw surge of fury and fear that nearly broke his discipline. He finished the fight in seconds, disarming Hale and pinning him to the floor. Hull struggled weakly, blood streaking his lip, eyes wide now with the realization that his money could not save him here. "It's over," Ethan said, voice shaking despite his effort to keep it steady. "Your roots are burned. Your accounts are wiped. The storm bought me time. That's all I needed." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Real sirens this time, not the performative delay of local police. Federal sirens cut through the storm, like a promise finally kept. Ethan knelt beside Rex, hands gentle but urgent as he assessed the wound. Blood soaked the fur, but the dog's eyes were clear, focused on Ethan's face. Rex tried to stand, refusing weakness even now. "You did good," Ethan whispered hoarsely, pressing his forehead to the dog's. In that moment, with rain hammering the windows and the world finally catching up to the truth, Ethan understood something he had spent years avoiding. This wasn't about orders anymore, or even justice. It was about the people who didn't have teeth sharp enough to fight back. It was about standing in the storm, so others didn't have to. As federal agents breached the building, weapons raised, Ethan stepped back, hands visible, Rex at his side despite the injury. He felt exhaustion settle into his bones, heavy and unavoidable, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Grayport would not drown quietly, and neither would he. Dawn came slowly to Grayport, not as a sudden burst of light, but as a cautious unveiling, as if the sun itself was unsure whether the town was ready to be seen again. The storm had passed, leaving behind streets washed clean, puddles reflecting a sky that was finally pale instead of bruised. For the first time in years, the harbor smelled more of salt than fear. Federal vehicles lined the docks and the main road, black SUVs and unmarked vans idling with quiet authority. Men and women in jackets marked FBI, ATF, and Naval Criminal Investigative Service moved with calm efficiency, cataloging evidence, sealing doors, escorting handcuffed figures into waiting cars. The operation was methodical, relentless, and final. Black Tide Shipping was no longer a shadow over Grayport. It was a crime scene. Ethan Walker sat on the edge of a mobile medical unit parked near the exchange building, his injured shoulder immobilized in a rigid sling. His face looked drawn now that the adrenaline had burned away, the hard lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture remained straight, instinctively disciplined. A medic finished securing the bandage and stepped back with a nod of approval. "You're lucky," the man said. "Another inch and that round would have shattered bone beyond repair. I've had worse." Ethan replied quietly. At his feet lay Rex. The Belgian Malinois was stretched out on a thermal blanket, his powerful frame finally at rest. His shoulder was wrapped in clean white gauze, already marked with a faint red bloom, but his breathing was steady and strong. His amber eyes followed Ethan's every movement, unblinking, alert even now. Rex was 4 years old, a veteran in dog years, his muzzle dusted with a hint of gray earned through service rather than age. When Ethan reached down with his uninjured hand, Rex's tail thumped once against the pavement, restrained but unmistakably content. Across the lot, a group of local police officers stood separated from the federal teams, their expressions ranging from stunned to furious. Among them was Deputy Alan Price, the mustached officer whose eyes had once looked away too quickly. Now he stood with his hands cuffed in front of him, shoulders slumped, the weight of years of quiet compromise finally catching up. He didn't resist as he was guided toward a transport van. His gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, shame and relief tangled together, before he looked down at the ground. The arrests continued through the morning. Warehouse managers, dock supervisors, accountants, contractors. The network unraveled faster than anyone in Grayport had imagined possible, as if it had only ever been held together by the illusion of invincibility. When that illusion shattered, everything else followed. By mid-morning, the townspeople began to emerge. They came cautiously at first, standing in doorways, gathering at the edges of streets, watching the dismantling of the world that had ruled them through intimidation and silence. Mothers held children close. Old men leaned on canes, eyes narrowed, not trusting the calm. But as the hours passed and the sirens did not turn on them, something shifted. Hope crept in. Elena Morales stood near the corner of her street, her 2 children beside her, both wrapped in oversized jackets. Elena looked tired but lighter. The tightness in her jaw eased. When she saw Ethan across the way, she hesitated, then raised a hand in a small, grateful wave. Ethan nodded back once, a soldier's acknowledgement, no ceremony needed. Naomi Reed appeared near the docks, hair still damp from rain, freckles bright against skin that looked healthier already, without constant fear hollowing it out. She didn't approach Ethan, but she watched him from a distance, her posture straighter than before, as if she were already imagining a future that extended beyond survival. Shortly before noon, a pair of dark green military vehicles rolled into Grayport, their presence unmistakable even without insignia. From the lead vehicle stepped a man whose bearing immediately drew attention. Commander James Callahan was in his early 50s, tall and broad, with iron-gray hair cut close and a beard trimmed with meticulous care. His face bore the kind of lines carved by decades of command, deep-set eyes that missed nothing, and a scar running along his left cheekbone, a souvenir from a training accident early in his career that had shaped his uncompromising approach to preparation and discipline. Callahan had served with distinction across multiple theaters, earning a reputation as a leader who protected his people fiercely, but demanded absolute accountability. He crossed the lot with purposeful strides and stopped in front of Ethan. "Walker," Callahan said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Sir," Ethan replied, starting to rise before Callahan waved him down. "At ease," the commander said, then glanced at Rex. "That your partner?" "Yes, sir." Callahan crouched slightly, studying the dog with professional appreciation. "Good animal," he murmured. Rex met his gaze calmly. "Tail still. Very good." Callahan straightened and looked back at Ethan. "Your data broke this wide open. Joint Task Force confirmed everything you sent. Black Tide is finished, here and elsewhere." He paused. "Your administrative hold is lifted. Record cleared. Officially." Ethan absorbed that quietly. For a moment, he hadn't realized how heavily the uncertainty had weighed on him until it was gone. "Thank you." "Sir." "There's more," Callahan continued. He reached into a case carried by one of the accompanying officers and withdrew a small presentation box. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a military service medal adapted for a canine harness, its polished surface catching the morning light. "This is for Rex," Callahan said. "Military working dog commendation for valor under fire." Ethan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. He knelt beside Rex, carefully fitting the medal onto the dog's harness. Rex shifted slightly, confused by the attention, then settled as Ethan's hand rested against his neck. "You earned it," Ethan whispered. Applause rippled softly through the small crowd that had gathered, hesitant at first, then stronger. Rex's ears flicked at the sound, tail wagging once. Then again, Grayport spent the afternoon changing. Federal agents remained, but the tone shifted from enforcement to rebuilding. Notices were posted. Temporary assistance centers opened. The Harbor Light Diner reopened under new management. Its windows cleaned, its neon sign repaired. Children played near the pier for the first time in years. Their laughter tentative but real. Ethan walked through town slowly as the sun dipped lower, Rex at his side. People nodded to him, some thanking him quietly, others simply meeting his eyes with an understanding that required no words. He did not linger. Heroes, Ethan knew, did not belong to places they saved. They belonged to the next storm, at the edge of town, where the road curved inland and the forest began. Ethan stopped. He looked back once more at Grayport, now bathed in warm light, smoke from cooking fires rising peacefully into the sky. The town was scarred, but alive. Healing would take time, but the fear was gone. That mattered. He adjusted the strap of his pack, careful of his shoulder, and whistled softly. Rex looked up immediately, alert and ready. "Let's go," Ethan said. They walked on as the sun finally cleared the horizon fully, flooding the road ahead with gold. Ethan felt the ache in his body, the weight of memory and responsibility, but beneath it was something new. Not peace, peace was fragile, but certainty. He had not been alone in Greyport, and he would not be alone moving forward. Somewhere behind him, a town breathed freely for the first time in a decade, and somewhere ahead, another horizon waited. End of chapter 5. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky or light from heaven. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wearing scars, walking on tired legs, guided by loyalty and courage. In Greyport, the miracle was not that evil existed, but that someone chose to stand against it when silence would have been easier. In our everyday lives, we may never face guns, storms, or shadows like Ethan did, but we face our own battles: fear, injustice, loneliness, exhaustion, moments when doing the right thing feels too heavy to carry. And yet, just like in this story, change begins when one person decides not to look away, when one heart refuses to stay silent, when faith becomes action. Maybe the miracle is this: that God places people in our path, friends, strangers, even loyal companions who stand beside us when we are weak. Maybe the miracle is that we are stronger than we believe and braver than we feel when we choose to protect what is right. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you the most. Or simply type Amen if you believe that courage and faith still matter in this world. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey of strength, sacrifice, and hope. May God bless every one of you watching. May He protect you and your loved ones, give you courage in the storms of life, and surround you with loyal hearts when the road grows dark. And may you never walk alone, knowing that even in the hardest moments, miracles are still possible. Thank you for watching. God be with you always.